So I'm going to turn to something a little different. You have a huge reputation and a long record of being particularly interested in making sure that minority students achieve and women achieve it in learning. Do you see any difference in achievement levels based on using these kinds of methods as opposed to traditional methods? So how does your involvement with the SENCER ideals or whatever, has it had any kind of discernible effect in these other interests that you have, where you've been a leader for so long?
Well, it's influenced the way that I think about working with faculty members across science and engineering areas, for example. That's one of the things that has impacted. Because when I think about the diversity area, I look at it as three major kinds of things, approaches that I have tried to take over the years. One of those being sort of the academic support programs, and that is, to what extent can one stand outside of the regular, yes, okay, and offer certain kind of support through study groups, etc. Another has to do with the sort of curricular and pedagogical changes that impact all students, but some would argue that certain pedagogical curricular approaches have a differential sort of impact and impacts underrepresented students in a favorable way. For example, I would argue that SENCER type approach impacts students who are less engaged with mathematics and science in an even more favorable way. So that's kind of a dimension. And then the third...
Because it's, sorry to interrupt you, but do you have a hypothesis about why that is?
I think that part of it is an engagement issue.
Okay.
Okay? You know, my sense
the work
is that
about something real.
That it's about something real. What motivates people to study science or engineering or whatever can be very different. But I think that for many underrepresented students, and I would also argue that would include women, for example, that many of them are motivated by the desire to do something because they see whatever issues or problems or whatever. My own orientation towards diversity work, my own orientation towards technology and policy work, for example, was highly motivated by internal forces of trying to make a difference in doing something. So I decided to take my mathematics background and use it in these kinds of ways because I was personally motivated to do that. So I think that's an aspect of sort of engagement. Another, I think, is just the whole notion of sort of community and sharing that SENCER promotes. That is, how people learn and the way in which meaningful learning occurs. I think that is also highly appealing. Members of underrepresented groups often feel the least connected to the mainstream of institutional practices. So things that have a community kind of orientation, that has a sharing kind of orientation, I think that's another dimension of sort of what tends to bring certain students into sort of the SENCER approach.
So you were talking. I interrupted you when you were saying there were three approaches that you had taken.
Yeah. So I had started to talk about one of them being sort of the academic and social support that stands outside of the mainstream. And much work has been done. Right. You know, women in science and engineering, right. The various projects that bring groups together in various ways sometimes stand outside of the mainstream. And so I'd also mentioned the curricular and pedagogical approaches, and you had asked me about...
Where you located SENCER.
Where I located SENCER. And the third that I was just going to mention is sort of the whole notion of sort of policy and institutional policy and its impact on our thinking about diversity and, in particular, and STEM education in general.